The event will begin in 5 minutes.
سيبدأ الحدث في غضون 5 دقائق.
Please be seated. The event is about to begin.
يرجى منكم التكرم بالجلوس. سيبدأ الحدث بعد قليل.
Ladies and gentlemen, please put your phones on silent.
سيداتي سادتي، يرجى وضع الهاتف المحمول على وضع الصامت.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you found day one exciting, especially the opening ceremony. We're now on day 2 of WEP 2026 with another keynote session titled Reimagining Education for Adaptation. But before we begin, a quick reminder, students taking WEP for credit, please check in for this session if you haven't done so already, and check out at the end, which only happens after the session has concluded. To introduce our keynote speaker and moderate the QA session, we are pleased to have Dr. Michelle Remington, Director of the KAUST School, with a PhD in higher education administration and nearly 3 decades of international education experience spanning 3 continents. Dr. Remington serves on regional and global boards supporting teacher professional development and accreditation worldwide. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Remington to the stage.
Thank you. It is an honor and a privilege to be here today, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to introduce our keynote speaker. Dr. Stephanie Knox Steiner is an assistant professor of peace education and the program coordinator in the Department of Peace and Conflict Studies at the University for Peace in Costa Rica. She earned her doctorate in the Community, Liberation, Indigenous, and Ecopsychology's specialization at Pacific Graduate Institute. She co-founded the Jill Knox Peace Through Humor Fellowship Program, which offers professional development to peace builders through the Humor Academy of the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor. Her teaching, research, and writing interests currently lie at the intersection of regenerative peace pedagogies, reimagining education, and transrational ways of knowing, such as community dream work. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Stephanie Knox Steiner for our keynote presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon. How are you all doing today? Well, I am so happy and honored to be here with you today to talk about reimagining education for adaptation, which I would like to frame as educating for futures of planetary flourishing. I want to start by asking you a question. What do you love about being alive on the earth in this moment? What is something that recently gave you a sense of wonder or awe or enchantment? I invite you to bring something to mind and bring it present with you in this space. So I have to tell you, this is something that I love about being alive. This is a picture of the view from my home in Costa Rica, where I currently live and teach. And last week, a group of visiting students to my university asked me where my favorite place I'd traveled was, and I said everywhere. And I truly meant it. Everywhere, from my small town in Costa Rica to the skyscrapers of Tokyo to a mud hut in rural Niger, has been my favorite, and I've seen incredible beauty in all of the places around the world that I've had the good fortune to visit. With each place I visit, I fall in love with the world even more, and now I have Saudi Arabia to add to my list of favorites. And I want to thank you for welcoming me to your beautiful country, which in just a short time has given me more reasons to love the world. If we want to address the pressing socio-ecological crises of our time, our love for the world is where we need to start. This is something I learned from teacher Joanna Macy, whose body of work is called the work that reconnects. When we love something, we want to care for it and protect it. And if we start from gratitude and love, this will motivate us to take right action. So I invite us to begin here today with our love for the world and our sense of wonder and amazement for being alive. I am so honored to be here to talk with you today about this topic. And in the spirit of beginning with gratitude, I want to thank the organizers of the Winter Enrichment Program, especially WEP Chair Professor Deanna Lacoste and the amazing WEP team for inviting me, and for choosing to place a discussion around education right at the start of the program. Because to me, this really highlights the important and necessary role that rethinking education has in reshaping the world. Education makes the world. It doesn't make it alone, but it is world-making in the sense that what we educate about and how we educate has a significant effect on what the world becomes. Or in the words of humane educator Zoe Weil, the world becomes what we teach. And I would add that the world also becomes how we teach. The methods and relationships within our educational structures teach as much as the content. We need to consider the kind of world we're making through our educational systems and the kind of world we want to make together. The field of peace education, my disciplinary and vocational home, proposes that education should be oriented towards making a more peaceful world. The Earth Charter describes peace as the wholeness created by right relationships with oneself, other persons, other cultures, other life, Earth, and the larger whole of which we are a part. If we want to see a more peaceful world, we need to educate for it, and we need to understand the ways that education has contributed to violence and how it can contribute towards more peaceful relationships at all levels. We also need our teaching methods and structures we teach within to be aligned with this goal. Education touches and affects us all, both directly and indirectly. I know many of you are students, some of you are faculty, and some are parents of school-age children, and that many of you are scientists and engineers. No matter your role, we all have a stake in education, which is why I believe that reimagining education needs all of us. The world also desperately needs scientists, technologists, and engineers who are peace builders, using their skills and expertise to design and create with collective well-being in mind. I am so glad you all are here. And I had no idea how relevant this topic would be to you. I was blown away by the Slido results from last night's opening, which placed education front and center as the area most needing improvement when we think about adaptation. I agree with you, and I will be sharing some of my ideas about this in the talk, and I really look forward to hearing yours. Education is also an inherently hopeful endeavor. Implicit in the notion of learning is the belief that we can change, can grow, can transform, and that the world can change too. So I'd love to begin from this place of possibility, that inherent in the idea of reimagining education is the sense that the world can be different, and that we can shape it together, and that our educational structures and systems have an important role to play in this shaping. I invite us to enter into an inquiry together into the role education has played in getting us into this moment of planetary crises and the role it has to play in transforming it and helping us reach beyond it. I might leave you with more questions than answers, and I hope that you leave with a lot to think about and some things that might be useful to you. One thing I want to say to you up front, you are the experts of your context, and I know very little about education here. So when I talk about education, I'm speaking about education very broadly. One of the key themes I want to highlight today is that education for adaptation has to be contextual and locally rooted. It has to be relevant and accountable to the local context while situating the local within our broader planetary context. Some of the questions I'm inviting us to explore together in this inquiry are, how has education contributed to getting us to this moment of intersecting global crises? When we say adaptation, what are we adapting to? And what is the role of education in adaptation and reaching beyond it? The basic thesis of my talk, just to tell you up front, is that the root causes of our current collective crises are separation and disconnection. And education for adaptation must help us remember our interconnectedness with each other and to all of life. And from this place, we will find ways to adapt to our current realities and also reach beyond them. We need to transform in order to adapt. And we also need to continue dreaming of futures of more justice, equality, flourishing, and thriving for all of life. Our dreams, imagination, and creativity are some of the most important resources we have to help us reach beyond our current conditions and towards a world where we can all thrive. Because a world where all of life flourishes is possible, and education has a key role to play in helping move us towards this world. We started with love, and now we're going to step into the future. Because the future is already present. And if education is world-making, we need to imagine the world we are educating towards. Austrian poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, "The future enters into us today in order to transform itself in us long before it happens. The future is already present in this very moment. The question becomes, what kind of future do we want to live into? And what can we do now to bring that future to life when it is already alive within us? To reimagine education, we have to start with the future we long for, which is already here in this moment, both in our imaginations and our actions. I'd like to begin with a little exercise in time travel. I know this might sound weird or uncomfortable, but I propose that sitting with discomfort is a core capacity for educating for thriving planetary futures. So with that in mind, I invite you to get quiet, and I invite you to take a deep breath. If it's comfortable, you can close your eyes, or you can just soften your gaze. Taking a deep breath, imagine with this breath, you are transported 30 years into the future, 2056. This isn't the future of business as usual. This is the future in which humanity has gotten our collective act together. We have solved our current crises, and we are living in greater harmony with each other and the earth. In short, we have adapted. This isn't a utopia where everything is permanently fixed. We have come to realize that it is an ongoing dance of living in harmony and balance, of ongoing repair, healing, and regeneration. We have figured out how to create systems and ways of living in which we can weave relationships of repair when harm happens, when we can come back into balance when we've fallen out of it, when we return to alignment, where humanity has become a beneficial species to life on Earth. Notice, what does this future look like? What do you see? What does it feel like to be in it? What does education look like in this future? And what is the kind of education that got us here? Take a few moments to look around. You can take another deep breath, and with this breath, return to the present moment, releasing the vision, but bringing it back with you. And I know it might be hard to come back. And if it was hard to imagine, don't worry. When I do this exercise in classes, I usually ease people into it and do some warming up. But for the sake of our time today, I wanted us to dive right in because I believe we need to have this vision in mind, to imagine that other worlds are possible and that a future where all of life thriving is possible. And it is our responsibility and duty to imagine ourselves into this future, and education has an essential role to play in getting us there. I'd like to invite you to take 2 minutes to share with a neighbor what you saw in this future, because the beautiful thing about this future is that none of us can see all of it. We actually need each other's imaginations, and we need to put our ideas together to have a more complete vision of the future we need to be moving towards, what writer and activist Adrienne Marie Brown calls imagination collaboration. So go ahead, talk to a neighbor, and just share with them a little bit about what you saw in this future. And I'll bring you back in 2 minutes. All right, I'm going to start bringing you back. And I know there's more to share, but I hope you can continue sharing your visions of the future on the coffee break later. So I'd like us to imagine that a better future is here with us today, alive in each one of us, waiting to be born. I've done this exercise many times with groups all over the world. And I would say while often technology has an important role to play in the future visions that appear, the most common recurring theme I notice is seeing a green future with humans living in harmony with nature. So with our love for the world and a flourishing future in mind, I invite us to return to the present moment and explore where we are and what has been education's role in getting us here. And sorry, this gets a little bleaker. Maybe aligned with the song, the Pink Floyd song that we began with. We are living in a moment of intersecting, interrelated, and compounding global crises, what some have called the meta-crisis, marked by global climate chaos, economic shocks, health crises, and political turmoil and conflict. The meta-crisis has also been called the meta-consequence by a group called the Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures Collective, meaning the crises we are experiencing are the logical outcome of centuries-old unsustainable systems built on violence, hierarchy, inequality, and separation. There are many ways to name and articulate this moment, but for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to use the language of the meta-crisis as the frame, but I want us to keep this idea of consequences in mind. This isn't to say the present moment is all bad. We've made enormous progress in many fields, including science and technology. But up until now, the innovation has come at a cost of human and ecological destruction. So we have to ask ourselves, is there another way? And I have to believe there is another way. If we see education as a world-making endeavor, then we have to reckon with the fact that education has contributed to making the world as it is now, resulting in the meta-crisis. Education, in part, got us here. It's not solely to blame, though society tends to love to blame teachers for everything, a little joke for the educators in the crowd. But we have to reckon with education's contribution, because the world has never been more educated than it is right now, and yet we find ourselves in the midst of planetary social ecological collapse. Along these lines, I've been thinking of a book that psychologist James Hillman and writer Michael Ventura co-authored in 1991 called "We've Had 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World is Getting Worse." In the book, Hillman and Ventura call into question the nature of Western psychotherapy, which tends to isolate problems to the individual psyche rather than seeing them as connected with the wider world in which we are situated. They critique the way psychology has individualized problems that are collective in nature, and part of their call is to reroute psychology in the world. We can raise similar questions and make similar critiques about modern education. The world is more educated than it ever has been, more and more people going through formal schooling, more people with advanced degrees, and yet the world is getting worse by many measures, particularly in terms of unsustainability, inequality, and violence. Education as we know it has not led to a world of greater sustainability, equality, justice, or peace. Quite the opposite. As such, we should view our current crises as an educational crisis, because if the world has never been more educated and it has led us to this point, to the destruction of life, then we really need to question how we are educating and what we are educating towards and about, and what has been missing in our education. If the world becomes what we teach, as I shared earlier, then we have to ask, what have we been teaching and not teaching that has contributed to getting us into this mess? Modern education as it presently exists is designed to uphold and get people to fit into the present systems that are based in separation, that lead to domination, exploitation, and hierarchy, vast inequality, and ecological collapse. In his seminal work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Brazilian educator Paulo Freire wrote, Education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate the integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity, or it becomes the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world. Modern formal schooling largely contributes to upholding the status quo and inviting the younger generations to conform to it through what Freire calls the banking model of education, in which students are seen as empty vessels to be filled with the knowledge of the teacher only to repeat it. Education enacted in this way becomes a form of domination and does not teach students to participate actively and creatively in their world. It rather teaches them to replicate the world as it is. It lacks critical thinking and creativity, two of the most essential skills and dispositions needed for viable futures to be possible. Echoing Hillman and Ventura's critique of psychotherapy, modern education often sustains a paradigm of separation, disconnected from life. The meta-crisis is therefore an educational crisis, and at its heart, a relational one. By centering the isolated individual, splitting knowledge into silos, and detaching learning from place and community, schooling teaches the myth of separateness, and that myth cascades violence. When education is cut off from life, we also learn a false sense of humanity's place in the web of life. The good news is that if separation is learned, it can be unlearned. Modern education is also oriented towards getting students to fit in within the logic of exponential growth-oriented capitalism, in which the focus of education has been contributing to infinite economic expansion. But we live on a finite planet, an abundant planet that can support a lot of life and is full of near-limitless possibilities, but one that cannot sustain unlimited consumption and extraction. There are limits to growth, but our global economic systems and relations do not reflect or honor these limits. Modern education largely promotes conformity to this system that is causing massive social and ecological destruction. The end goal of modern education is to get a good job in the current economic systems, which are exploitative and damaging our planetary home. To survive within these systems, many of the best-paying jobs are engaged in extraction and exploitation. I would argue also that our educational/relational crisis is not an informational crisis. When I entered the field of peace education, I believed that we lacked information, and if we just had the correct information and understanding and taught the right things in schools, then the world would be different. And while to some extent this is true, information alone has not been enough. Take the climate crisis, for example. We've had the facts and figures about climate change for decades. What we have lacked is the collective will to make change, the ethical responsibility towards each other and the planet, and the understanding of our interconnectedness, which might push us to act differently, to act as if we belong to each other and the planet. Information alone is not enough, and rational and intellectual understanding alone is not enough. We need to educate minds and hearts. Modern formal education tends to focus on one way of knowing, the intellectual, the rational, the written word, while at best ignoring and often devaluing and erasing other ways of knowing, such as social, emotional, land-based, traditional, and embodied knowledges. This pattern of overvaluing one way of knowing over others is called epistemic violence and epistemic injustice by decolonial scholars. This is not to say intellectual understanding is not important, but it is to acknowledge its limitations as one way of knowing. To summarize, education has contributed to the meta-crisis by perpetuating a paradigm of separation through promoting individualism and anthropocentrism, requiring students to fit into an economic system rooted in exponential growth on a finite planet, and overvaluing one form of knowledge over others. Now let us look at what we are adapting to and what education could be for otherwise. The meta-crisis/meta-consequence requires us to consider how we adapt to current conditions and a rapidly changing and unpredictable future. As WEP has declared, adaptation is not optional, it is essential, and there is much we need to transform in order to adapt. In thinking about education for adaptation, I began to wonder, though, do we really want to adapt to anything right now? Adaptation seems to imply acceptance, which I don't think is what we're going for. We don't want to equate adaptation with settling for or accepting the status quo. Yes, we need to adapt to the world as it is. We need to adapt to finite planetary systems, for example. However, we don't want to equate adaptation for accepting inequality, injustice, or unsustainability. We should not settle for the status quo as it is or conform to its logic. We should not adapt to current realities and just leave it there. Reimagining education for adaptation invites us to reach beyond it towards the transformation of these systems. When I ask myself the question, what are we adapting to? Succinctly, I believe we need to adapt to our planetary limits and the laws of nature. Ecologically speaking, we live on an abundant yet finite planet, and many of our educational systems are currently oriented around the idea of infinite economic growth, either implicitly or explicitly. We also need to adapt to our place in the world as a species, of decentering humanity, unlearning anthropocentrism, and placing ourselves, in the words of poet Mary Oliver, in the family of all things, as a regenerative part of the Earth's living metabolism. We are also adapting to a world that is vastly interconnected and increasingly so. The interconnectedness is not new. We always have been. We are just more aware of our interconnectedness than ever due to technological advancements in communication. We are more connected with the events in other regions than we ever have been. And events like climate disruption and the global COVID-19 pandemic have helped us feel this in ways we have not been aware of before. We are also able to forge relationships and friendships in ways we have not been able to, and foster greater intercultural understanding. But understanding isn't a given. Our vast interconnectedness can also lead to greater misunderstanding and conflict if we do not engage with openness, awareness, and humility, which is where education also has an important role to play. Educating for planetary limits might sound stifling and uninspiring. However, limits can inspire creativity. I'm sure many of you are familiar with working within constraints of a specific location or materials or a budget. If you're an artist or writer, sometimes having unlimited possibilities like a blank page or a blank canvas can be daunting. But using a limit, a canvas size for a painting, or forcing yourself to use specific random words as a writer can inspire creativity. In this sense, education for adaptation is an invitation. It's an invitation for us to lean into the creative possibilities of learning to live within our planetary boundaries, and that these constraints can inspire innovation. While the planet has limits we need to honor, the possibilities are nearly endless for how we might shape a more livable future. This brings us to my final question for today of what education could be for, should be for, education's role in adaptation, and the idea of the meta-crisis as a meta-possibility. In this moment of planetary unraveling, crisis, and collapse, we have an opportunity to come together and collaborate like never before, to repair and heal from past harms, and to design systems that work for all of us and the planet. Is it possible for the meta-crisis to become an opportunity to reimagine the world otherwise? And how might education help get us there? I put possibility with a big question mark there because I do not want to diminish or sidestep the painful realities of the meta-crisis/consequence. Journalist Naomi Klein, who wrote the book The Shock Doctrine, coined the term disaster capitalism to describe how some in power have taken advantage of crises and even manufactured them in order to push forward economic policies that benefit a very small, wealthy segment of global society. There is a way that the meta-crisis can be exploited for greater personal gain. For example, the wealth consolidation we saw among global elites during the pandemic. But might this moment alternatively be a chance of coming together to solve these crises in equitable ways never seen before, in ways that allow for all of us and the Earth to thrive and flourish? If education makes the world, and it has made the world as we know it now, how can we reimagine education to adapt to honor planetary limits? If we return to our initial visions of the future, where all of life thrives, how can we reimagine education to contribute towards making that world? Here is a non-exhaustive list of ideas to get us started, but I will eagerly await your contributions as well. And you might think of these as my response to the exercise I had you all do earlier. To begin, reimagining education for adaptation needs to put life at the center of learning. It needs to reorient education towards serving life, rooted in the interconnectedness with all of life. With relationality as the foundation, everything else springs forth. For those of us who've already been taught to conform to existing systems, we have a lot of unlearning to do. Unlearning separation, hierarchy, domination, and supremacy. If we place life at the center, this will change everything about how we educate and what we educate about. Putting life at the center means we need to make space in education for wonder, curiosity, love, care, excitement, and enchantment with life. Humans are born to learn. We are born curious about the world around us. We only need to create spaces of learning that foster, nurture, and encourage this wonder and enchantment with the world, rather than diminish it. Furthermore, we also need to shift the relationships within educational systems away from domination, control, and conformity towards collaboration, accountability, and reciprocity. As such, education for adaptation needs to be world-centered rather than student-centered or teacher-centered or curriculum-centered. This means educating students to understand themselves as part of the community of life and to find their gifts to be of service to the community, and for learning to be relevant to life and living. It needs to be Earth-centered, honoring planetary limits and the wisdom of Earth intelligence of which we are a part, and seeing ourselves as part of the Earth's metabolism. As we disrupt the individualism baked into modern education, collaboration becomes an essential methodology to restore relationality to the learning process. World-centered also means fostering relationships grounded in responsibility and accountability to each other, our communities, and to the Earth community. It should be locally rooted and locally relevant while keeping the local situated within the wider global planetary context. Some education for sustainable development still perpetuates the idea of humans as separate from nature, so a world-centered education must help us remember that we are a part of the world, not separate from it or above it. When we center the world in our learning, learning becomes inherently wilder. Learning is wilder than schools can contain, and part of our task in world-centered learning is returning our learning to our communities and the wider world of which we are a part. Education for adaptation needs to be holistic, teaching for the whole human. It needs to honor that we are not just intellectual beings, but we are living, breathing, feeling earthlings. Education needs to be transrational, meaning it should honor and value ways of knowing beyond the intellectual and rational, such as social, emotional, embodied, and land-based ways of knowing. It needs to be relational, not just informational. Again, to be clear, this is not to dismiss the intellectual and the rational. This is absolutely needed and has an important role to play in education and shaping the world. But it is to place this way of knowing as one among many and revaluing other ways of knowing that have been dismissed. We also need to rethink what we mean by rigor. In education, we are often focused on intellectual rigor, but often at a cost to well-being. Can we be intellectually rigorous and also rigorous in our relationships and rigorous in our care? We need to rethink rigor in academic settings and how it can coincide with relational rigor and collective well-being. In the face of uncertain futures, our imaginations and creativity are some of our greatest resources and assets. Traditional formal schooling tends to squash creativity over time while teaching students to conform to tests and exams, and also making us afraid of failure. Educating for fluctuating futures needs to nurture our creativity and imagination more than ever, as well as our ability to stay with the trouble of these times, dwell in uncertainty, lean into emergence, and get over a fear of failing. Education for adaptation also needs to be transdisciplinary. The spirit of WEP is very much along these lines. We need to get out of our disciplinary silos if we're going to solve these problems, and I applaud KAUST for having the vision of the need for this kind of transdisciplinary exchange. This is what we need more of. Transdisciplinary also means we need scientists who are artists and artists who think like scientists, and I love to see this spirit reflected in WEP too. It should also be intergenerational. Modern education places people in age-based silos, whereas throughout human history, humans have learned more intergenerationally. Education for adaptation should break free from age-based silos and foster intergenerational learning spaces for lifelong learning. Furthermore, in our vastly interconnected world, we need to educate for intercultural understanding, which means educating for openness, awareness, and cultural humility. Additionally, we need a heavy dose of conflict transformation, potentially generative part of life on a diverse, interconnected planet. Finally, education for adaptation needs to be simultaneously critical and hopeful, rooted in agency. At the intersection of critique and hope lies our power to act, not just upon the world, but with the world. This is what Joanna Macy has called active hope, that we generate hope through the actions we take to make the world better. Education needs to equip students to be critical of the way things are and feel empowered to act with the world to transform the world towards making a better future with their everyday actions. Regarding agency, it's important to note that we are not acting alone. We are acting with the living, breathing world that is also acting that we are a part of. Systems of life tend to perpetuate life. We need to realign ourselves as a species to be good planetary citizens, playing our part in the regenerative whole, in the Earth's metabolism. A key to doing this is remembering ourselves as part of this system and disrupting the anthropocentrism we have learned through modernity. When we think we are acting alone, this can be daunting to the point of immobilization. No single person can solve our current crises alone. We need everyone bringing all of their gifts, and trust me, all of our gifts are needed, and none of our gifts alone are sufficient. We need all of us working with as much love and care as we can. Our agency is also about what we do with our knowledge. How we apply knowledge is never neutral, and it can be applied for benefit or detriment. It can be applied for health and well-being, or it can be applied for harm and violence. For example, science, engineering, and technology can serve to build war systems, which globally, so much human and material resources are spent developing new weapons rather than systems that can serve and enhance and affirm life. We need scientists and engineers and technologists who are eager to use their knowledge, creativity, and expertise to help us design and build futures in which all of life can thrive. I believe in you, and I believe in us. As a side note, but an important side note, reimagining education for adaptation also means we must concurrently reimagine our economic structures and relations. Manish Jain, founder of numerous innovative educational projects, including the Ecoversities Alliance, has coined the term alivelihoods and deadlihoods, which I find to be helpful in thinking about reimagining education and economies simultaneously. Livelihood is how we make a living, how we get our basic needs met, and hopefully contribute to our communities. Deadlihoods are the kinds of careers that contribute to the death and destruction of people and the planet, And unfortunately, many jobs in our current economic systems would fall into this category. Livelihoods are more than jobs. They are vocational pathways that allow us to contribute our unique skills, passions, and gifts towards collective and planetary thriving, and that contribute to shifting these systems. An economy oriented towards livelihoods is possible, and this is important for us to consider when we are reimagining education, as we need to simultaneously reimagine economic relationships and how we sustain our basic needs. I want to move towards closing by returning to our love for the world and the futures we imagined. On the other side of love is grief, the grief for the harm humanity is causing each other and the planet. Vietnamese Zen master and peacemaker Thich Nhat Hanh said that to address our ecological crises, what we most need to do is hear the sound of the earth crying within us. When we understand our interbeing with all of life, we begin to understand that when we harm anyone or anything, human or nature, we are harming ourselves. When we can hear the sound of the earth crying within us, these crises will motivate us to act differently, or these cries will motivate us to act differently, and we will know what to do. This is similar to what Joanna Macy calls honoring our pain for the world. When I first heard this phrase, I felt like it saved me. As a young person in the late 90s and early 2000s learning about the climate crisis a long time ago, I felt so much pain for what humanity had done to the planet, and hopelessness of finding our way out of it. Joanna Macy teaches us that honoring this pain, when we honor it from this place, we will have energy to know how to act and what to do. This is how we generate active hope. Both of these teachers also said, and as we began this talk, we need to fall in love with the earth and remember what we love about being alive and what we're grateful for. When we can touch the wonders of the world, the beauty that is alive in each moment, the miracle of our lives with each breath, this will motivate us to protect life. As we reimagine education, it needs to have space for our grief, for all that is being lost, and for our love for the world. And this grief and love will serve as great motivators. The great writer and educator Bell Hooks also said, "The practice of love is the most powerful antidote to the politics of domination." If we want to uproot systems of domination rooted in a paradigm of separation, our educational systems need to help us learn to practice love, our love of learning and our love of life. Your question now might be, okay, so how do we do this? I'd need another hour for that. But for now, I just want to share 3 living examples of how some of these ideas are being implemented. One example is the university where I teach, the University for Peace in Costa Rica, whose mission is to provide humanity with an institution of higher education completely dedicated to peace. Another example is Springhouse Community School in Virginia in the United States, which places life at the center of learning and calls what they do vitality-centered education. And finally, one of the examples I am most inspired by, because it is not one example, it's a global ecosystem of examples springing up all over the world, is the Ecoversities Alliance, which is an alliance of people who are reimagining higher education with the flourishing of life at the center. And while I am just getting to know KAUST, I can see that you are a living lab for adaptation here, and I look forward to continuing to learn more so that I can add KAUST to my list of examples in the future. The term Earthling is often used in science fiction to differentiate inhabitants of Earth from alien species. I propose that we need to start thinking of ourselves as Earthlings, as citizens of the Earth, our shared planetary home. Biologist and writer Robin Wall Kimmerer, in her book Braiding Sweetgrass, writes that all flourishing is mutual. Our efforts to reimagine education need to be rooted in the possibility of mutual flourishing for all of life, and to remembering ourselves as Earthlings, as citizens of our cherished planet. As we close, I invite you to return to that place of love for the world, what you are most grateful for in being alive, and to that future you envision. May this love and our deepest desires for a future where all of life thrives begin to take root in the present moment and serve to guide our actions. And may it help guide us in reimagining educational spaces that contribute to the flourishing of all of life. Thank you for welcoming me to your beautiful corner of our shared planetary home. I look forward to continuing to engage in these ideas with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stephanie. At this point, we would like to invite the Q&A session. So if you have questions that you would like to ask, please come down and they'll have microphones for you to ask those questions. And I'll join you up here. If you do come up to a microphone, give me a wave so that I can see you. Maybe I'll start off with a question. Just, I was so fascinated by the talk about regeneration. And I know in education a lot of the time, probably for the last many decades, we've used the word sustainability. And we use it a lot here at KAUST as well. How do you see the difference between kind of that vocabulary, that word that we use, sustainability, versus a term like regeneration?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I use both words, but I've been using regenerative more these days, specifically because when I think of sustainability, there's not much that I feel like we want to sustain right now. We actually need to transform. And when I think about regenerativity, it's more about placing ourselves within the cycles of the earth, the cycles of birth and death and decay and regeneration. And I think as humans, as humanity, that's what we need to be moving towards. When I was talking in the talk about anthropocentrism, so much of our education has been geared around humans being separate from nature and being above nature. And it's not just that we're a part of nature, we are nature. And so to me, the word regenerative captures better trying to place ourselves back into, as I quoted the poet Mary Oliver, into the family of all things, and being a wholesome species and not a destructive one.
Interesting. Okay, I'm going to keep going because I have lots of questions.
I'll just throw out there, I was really intrigued and very delighted last night when education popped front and center in terms of the things that you all think need to change. So if anyone is feeling brave, I invite you to share why you put that on this, in the little poll last night on the Slido, and also what you think needs to change about education. I know we're an intergenerational crowd, youth voice. I didn't mention this in the talk, but centering youth voices in changing education is essential. Like, so often educational decisions are made without any inclusion of young people and the people for whom the education exists. If anyone feels inspired to share why you chose to put education on the Slido last night, I would also love to hear. But maybe you can go on to your next question in the meantime.
So one of the topics that you raised was constraint, and that constraints often lead to innovation and creativity. What are some constraints that you believe we should, as humans, start to embrace a bit more? Are there some, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think we're living in a world of extreme opulence sometimes, and we just have access to so much. What are some constraints that that we as a community can consider, can think of as young students, as educators, that might help this regeneration process?
Yeah, that's a great and a difficult question, and I appreciate it very much. I used to teach a class on sustainability, justice, and ethics, and at the time I was living in California in the United States, which, much like your context here, it's a drought, it's a water-scarce context. And so often we are told to seek individualistic solutions, like stop using straws or take shorter showers. And while I think all of that has a place, I think it's good for us to be mindful of what we're consuming. We need systems level change. Like every person in the state of California could stop taking showers altogether, and that wouldn't account for, which would, yeah, we don't really want that either. But it would not account for the vast amount of water that's used for agriculture in places that shouldn't really support agriculture. So I do think there's like all of us can be more mindful of how we consume, but even that will only take us so far without systems level changes in terms of how we organize ourselves. Yeah.
Great for, again, us as a university looking at those systems and engineered systems worldwide, how we can impact that. I do see a question, please.
Hi, my name is Batul. First of all, I would like to thank you for a wonderful, very inspirational talk. Thank you so much. I actually have a question related to what you just said. A lot of the solutions you proposed are systematic. We do have a lot of core problems that need to be systematically changed, but I was wondering, what are your thoughts on things that we could do as individuals and specifically as students who are currently studying and are part of education, but more on the other side, maybe what are your thoughts on things we can do to be part of that change?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. I love this question. And two things come to mind, and I'm going to try to remember both of them. The first is this idea of fractals within nature. And so while we need systems change, each of us are part of the systems that we're living within. And this comes a little bit from the work of a writer and activist whose name is Adrienne Marie Brown. She wrote a number of books. One is called Emergent Strategy, and she talks about fractal organizing and how, the things we do at the small level affect the whole. So I am connected to that. Part of my, I guess, life's guiding path. I read this book by Thich Nhat Hanh, who I referenced in the talk. The book is called Peace is Every Step. And it's about how every action we take in our daily lives can contribute to peace in some level, whether it's our own peace, our inner peace, peace with each other, or peace in the wider world. And so that's one of the guiding principles of my life. So I think anything you do, when you're intentional about it, can contribute to the world that you want to see. The other thing, and I did remember it, is a quote from Bell Hooks, who I also referenced in the talk she gave. She wrote a book called Teaching to Transgress, and she talked about how the classroom remains the most radical space of possibility in the academy. As an educator, that quote guides my practice. I love the idea, like within an institution, for example, it can be it's possible to affect policy change, but that can be more challenging. I think it's helpful to think about what are the areas that you touch that you can affect. And so as an educator, I'm often thinking about, okay, how can I create a culture of peace within the classroom with my students? And I think as students, you can be thinking about that together. You know, how do we create more peaceful relationships among each other? How can we, try to build peace even in just a small classroom community, and how might that then ripple outward? So those are some beginning thoughts. I welcome anything that's stirred up for you. But
Amazing, thank you. I love this piece Very cool. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Thanks. I'll turn it over here.
Thank you so much for your insightful and inspiring presentation. I have a question about the education. The current development of AI actually is a kind of like a transforming power. Do you think it is possible for people to teach AI and so that more people can directly learn from AI to have their personalized study plan? You mentioned in the slide that many psychologists, they actually give many nice solutions, but sometimes people just don't have access to it. Do you think the AI will helpful to change that?
So I'm so happy to get a question about AI. I've been, over the past year, in a very deep inquiry with AI, and I would say I am in inquiry. Like, this is very much in progress, in process. Initially, when like ChatGPT and other accessible forms of AI came onto the scene, I'm generally a late technology adopter. I'm a child of the 80s. I grew up, analog. So I just generally don't adopt things quickly. As an educator, when AI hit the mainstream scene, it was just kind of this annoyance of like, oh, now I have to look for it in student papers, and there are ways that well, here's one thing. There are ways with the existence of AI that I think it's forcing us to look at how we've been educating and how education needs to change. I teach humanities in a graduate school where longer papers are very common, and now I love writing. I believe in the value of writing. I think it's important to learn how to write. But we've really been having to rethink how we assess student learning. And there's many other creative ways to assess learning beyond just a written paper. Which is to say, I think AI is placing us in this really interesting place of having to rethink everything. I took a class last year with an institute called the Lacoste Institute, and it was about AI in education. And before I took this class, I had been thinking, what is the role of AI in education? That was kind of the question I'd been asking myself. But in the course, they invited us to ask the question, what is the role of education in the age of AI? To me, that is a far juicier and much more important question, because the reality is AI is here. It's here to stay. It will be changing, but I think, as educators, we really need to be thinking what the role of education is. One more response. So I fell into a rabbit hole. In the bio, Michelle talked about how I use community dream work as a pedagogical practice. It's also a personal practice. But I one day read an article in The Guardian about someone using AI to analyze their dreams. And up until that point, I hadn't used AI. I had used it a little bit, used it for like emails and things like that. But I shared a dream with it, not thinking that I would get anything shocking or valuable out of it, and I was completely blown away. And then, that is what sort of sent me down this rabbit hole of a deep learning with AI. I mentioned the Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures Collective in the talk, and they're doing some incredible work around the regenerative and transformative potentials of AI. They offer a course through the University of British Columbia the University of Victoria, called A Meta-Relational Approach to AI. So a lot of what I talked about today in terms of relationality and interconnectedness, they're looking at AI still very critically and still very much holding the real ecological damage that current AI systems are doing and the extraction. But also, can AI, if we hold that, can it actually help us to see our interconnectedness? Like, if we really grapple with that, might AI be a path towards deeper relationality and if we figured out a way to create AI, and I'm sure some of you are working on this, I hope some of you are working on this, in ways that are more regenerative, you know, could doing that help us to align systems, align ourselves with systems in a different way? So I don't know if that starts to answer your question, and I welcome any thoughts that you have about it, but I'm sitting, and I think it's one of my favorite places to sit, at the edge of enchantment and disturbance. Like I'm very disturbed by, and particularly, like I come from the US, AI is being used a lot for surveillance and things like that, and this enchantment and the possibility, I think, that AI has to help us reach beyond current systems. So, yeah, thank you for that question.
Thank you. And another question is, you mentioned about the education system. Actually, education in most of modern people, it just happened in the early age of our life. But what's your idea about the education after the university or high school? How people can be educated or feel educated after that, after when they go to work and out of school?
Yeah, a lovely question. I mentioned very briefly in the talk, but I believe education should be lifelong, and that we never stop learning from the moment we're born until the moment we're no longer here. And so I think we need to collectively think about how we do that and how we provide opportunities for people of all ages to continue learning. And I think part of that is creating intergenerational learning spaces where children can learn from elders and everywhere in between.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, and thank you for joining us. What an inspirational keynote. We do have a gift of appreciation and a token of appreciation for you. If you could, thank you for that.
Oh my gosh. That's so beautiful. Wow. Thank you.
Thank you,
all
Dr.
so much.
Stephanie Knox, and for the keynote, and thank you, Dr. Michelle Remington, for moderating the QA session, as well as you from the audience with your questions. On behalf of WEP, we hope you have an amazing rest of the day. Please don't forget to check out, and see you again here tomorrow at 1 p.m. for another keynote session.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for your kind attention and for being here. Thank you.